Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Crosley Studio One's at beautiful Casa de Crosley. Today, we're going to talk about the presidency. We've talked about Congress. We've talked about how they operate. Remember, bill is introduced, it gets sent to committee. Committees are there to ease the job and make it easier to pass bills. Bill is an idea for a law. Passes one house, it's got to go to the other house and pass. Now, once they have one bill, it gets sent to the president. And remember, his powers are there. He can veto it, he can sign it, he can do nothing. And if he does nothing, it's like the 80-year-old man question. Depends on what's going on. If Congress is meeting during the 10 days and they're still meeting, bill becomes a law without a signature. If he does nothing, 10 days pass, and in those 10 days, Congress stops meeting, the bill is vetoed. All right? Last thing, remember, if the president vetoes it, Congress can override it with a 2/3 vote of each house. Each house. So about 230, 235, I think, in the house. No, I'm sorry. It's a higher number than that. Like 270. And then 2/3 of the Senate, 66. All right, let's get going on to the president. All right. First off, what are the qualifications? What do you have to be able to be president? First off, you've got to be a natural born citizen. All right. That means you out your ma here on American soil. You're a natural born citizen and you get your citizenship. That's the simplest way. The other way is if your parents are Americans, and let's say they're traveling and they're in Korea. Mom's American, dad's American, same routine. You're still an American, even though you're born in Korea. This happens a lot with, think of military people. Even though they're born on a foreign military base, they're still Americans. All right? You've got to be 35. Okay? 35 years old. That was about middle age back then. And you had to have been a resident for at least 14 years in the United States. They wanted you to be connected. I'm just kind of playing with my lighting here, so it's not shining so much on my glasses. But they wanted you to have a connection here. That's the reason for the 14 years. Kind of circling back to the natural born citizen. This is why it's written in the Constitution, you have to be a natural born citizen, why we will never have a president at all. Arnold Schwarzenegger will never be president because he was born in Austria. Yes, he's an American citizen. He got his naturalization papers. But the Constitution does not allow him to be the president. All right? We can have a senator, a representator, but not a presidentator. All right? So that's the easiest example. For Arnold Schwarzenegger to become president, they would have to pass a constitutional amendment changing it, and then therefore he could be president. But isn't likely that it's going to happen. Now, you're elected president. What do you get? You get a salary about $400,000. Yeah. You get to live in a White House. You get a little bit of an expense account. You get to fly on Air Force One for official duties. You get, what else? Camp David, which is another area you can spend time at. So there are some perks. But really, why do you become president? The power. First off, where do we find the president at? Article 2 of the Constitution. And in that section is where they list the powers of the president. It's not a big list. You look at the powers of Congress, they've got a nice long list. Article 1, Section 8. And then there's other powers. Remember, sprinkled throughout the Constitution for the Congress, not the president. All right. Now there's two types though. One that he can use on his own. The second type he shares with the Congress, particularly the Senate. For example, ones that he can use on his own. Commander-in-Chief. He is the leader of the military. The veto power is he can use it on his own. He does not share it with anybody. Easiest one to remember on sharing with Congress, the second type, is appointing officials. He can appoint them, but they have to be approved by the Senate. That power is shared. All right. It's really not an impressive list. Not a big list like Article 1, Section 8. His powers really come in ambiguous phrases like faithfully take care laws are faithfully executed. What does that mean? You know, it's 2020 and we're seeing kind of this fight right now with, you know, the coronavirus going on and President Trump. You know, he's saying he's got ultimate authority, making sure the laws are faithfully executed. And again, moving on here a little bit, you know, how the president is perceived depends on the presidential character. You look at Trump's personality. He's a very in-your-face person. So his presidency has tended to be in your face. Some people like that. Some people don't. But it's definitely how it gets organized. All right? Now, moving on through the notes. I hope you've scanned through the PowerPoint notes, get an idea where we're going here. Two-term presidencies are very rare. All right. FDR was elected to 4. The two-term presidency has been more of a recent phenomenon. You look back, President Obama, 2 terms. President Bush, 2 terms. President Clinton, 2 terms. We had a one-term president. President Bush is here, his father. Then we had Reagan. And then we go back before him. We skip one. And then we have Nixon. So right there, in my lifetime, 5 two-term presidents. That's been a rarity looking back further in presidential history. Okay? Now, I've got to ask you, because of FDR being elected 4 terms, we had that amendment. If you guys remember, 22nd Amendment limits the president to 2 terms. They were afraid he was going to be getting too much power every time that he gets elected. And so, it wasn't in the Constitution limiting you to 2 terms, just tradition. So they had to pass an amendment. Now, another important office within the presidency is the vice presidency. Most people don't think about it. It's a forgotten office, but it's still there and rather important. If you think back to the Congress, really the vice president's most important job is if he is the president, leader of the Senate. But even more importantly, he's got to be ready to take over and become president on the president's death. To be vice president, though, you need to be eligible to be vice president. You need to be eligible to be president. So we will never have a Vice President Obama. He's already served his 2 terms. We'll never have a Vice President Bill Clinton, 2 terms. Okay? So if you're not eligible to be president, you can't be vice president because you got to take over just in case. All right? Now, this vice president becoming president on the president's death has happened 8 times. And then there's one time where the president resigned. That was President Nixon, 1973, and Vice President Gerald Ford took over. Okay? And we've talked about it, but, Vice President becoming president really was tradition for quite a long time. You look in the Constitution, there's nothing in there that says the Vice President becomes the president. It says the power shall devolve to the Vice President. Does that mean he's president, or is he only acting? Tradition said he became the president. Tyler, talked about him, he basically got up there and said, I'm the president. Other people said, whoa, no, you're not. People just accepted it, though. All right? We didn't get this issue solved until the 25th Amendment, where the very first line that says, on the president's death, the vice president becomes president. All right? Wasn't solved until the 25th, and that would have been 1967. So 1790, 1890, 100 years, almost 200 years, 170 years-ish, math hard, it was just tradition. We didn't get a constitutional solution until the death of Kennedy. And even then, it was about 4 years after. So, you've got to look here. The vice presidents, though, when they run on their own as president, they very rarely get elected. Why? I can't say. Are the voters tired of that? They're figuring, hey, he's going to carry on this president's legacy. Who knows? The only vice president that comes to mind right away is George H.W. Bush. He was Ronald Reagan's vice president for 8 years, and then he got elected in 1988, but he only ended up being a one-term president. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, if the president only becomes ill, sick, the vice president temporarily assumes the duties. Doesn't become the president, just assumes the duties, and that's taken care of. An example of that would be in 1981. Somebody tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan, and George Bush took over temporarily while he was ill. Now, what happens if the president dies and the vice president dies? Well, again, kind of solved by the 25th Amendment. It kind of works like this. The president dies, vice president moves up. He's now the president. He gets to choose who his vice president is. Remember, he's appointing, so it has to be approved by the Senate. What if president and vice president die? That's solved from 1947. Okay? 1947 said, hey, if the president and vice president both die, then it goes to the Speaker of the House. Then it goes to the president pro tem of the Senate. And then after that, now we start working through the cabinet positions. So that it's really taken care of. If you're really interested to see who takes over when, go look up online presidential order of succession. And everybody is there. Okay? One of the things that we've witnessed during our time here in government class is an impeachment. What is an impeachment? It's just being charged. An impeachment does not mean you are guilty of anything. You're just being charged. In 2019, President Trump was impeached. He was charged. Now, the House of Representatives draws up those charges. Okay? They're the prosecutor. They draw up the charges. The Senate hears the case. They vote guilty, not guilty. And to find a guilty verdict, you need 2/3 vote. It's difficult. It really is. To get a conviction. In reality, only 3 presidents have been impeached. Andrew Johnson in the 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s. Bill Clinton in the 90s, and President Trump in 2019. Now, again, it's very, very difficult to get an impeachment. The closest we have come would have been President Nixon in the 70s and the Watergate scandal. But he resigned right before being impeached. Okay? He knew. President Nixon was a Republican, and it was pretty clear that the Republicans were going to vote to impeach and probably convict. Okay? That's why he resigned before any of that took place. So, we've looked at qualifications. We've looked at some of the powers. We've looked at what can happen. If the president, violates the law. And that's the other thing. What does he got to do to be impeached? In the Constitution, it says high crimes and misdemeanors. What does that mean? High crimes, they're pretty much talking about treason. Acting against the best interests of the United States. That's high crimes. Misdemeanors, who knows what that really meant. But really, they were looking at doing such things as acting against the interests of the United States. Okay? So far, if you've got any questions, shoot me an email, post something on Google Class, let me know. Now, presidential elections. We have this confusing thing called the Electoral College. There's no football team, there's no mascot, but somehow it's called a college. The Founding Fathers were afraid that the average American was too stupid to properly elect a president. They were afraid that they might be swayed by some great speaker or emotionally attached or something, based on fame, but not a qualified candidate. All right. So, and they were also afraid that the large states would just vote over the small states. Remember, if your elections, we had that whole small state, big state thing going on. So they created the Electoral College. Now, how does it work? Originally, the state chose electors. Still that way. And the number of electors is the number of representatives the state has, plus their senators, equals their total electors. So, for example, Ohio has 16 representatives, plus our 2 senators, 18 electoral votes. Now, originally, an elector would go in and he would cast his vote for who he wanted his first choice of president to be. Then he would cast the vote who my second choice for president would be. If it's not President Jefferson, well, then it'll be President Madison, And whoever won the most votes became president. Whoever came in second would be the vice president. Here's the problem. You could have a president from one party and a vice president from another party. That could lead to conflicts. And that happened. It really did happen. So they come along with the 12th. No, I'm going to back up just a little bit. So the original plan was the Founding Fathers figured, okay, we've got this safeguard, the Electoral College, but nobody's really going to get a majority to win. So if nobody gets a majority, then the House of Representatives votes who they want to be president. They're a little bit more educated, a little bit more in tune, so they'd make a proper choice. It's happened a couple of times, but usually the Electoral College chooses the president. Now, to be elected president, currently in 2020, and it's been that way for quite a long time, is you need 270 votes. The first person to get 270 wins. Game over. If you get 270, there might be a tie, but that's where the House of Representatives would have come in. So, okay, I had a little brain fart there. So, the original plan wasn't working. So they come up with the 12th Amendment. In that basically changed the format a little bit. So basically, you vote for who you want to be president, and you vote for who you want to be vice president. And since usually the president and vice president run together, if you're going to vote for candidate A, you're going to vote for vice president candidate A. So that's how they get elected. All right? You vote the ticket. And the easiest way to kind of think about it or understand a presidential election with the Electoral College is you, instead of having one big popular vote, candidate A gets 2 million, candidate B gets 1.5 million, candidate A wins. Popular vote. Think of it as 50 little presidential elections. Okay? And you've got to win the state of Ohio. If you win the state of Ohio, you tally up their 16 votes. You win Florida, you win those votes. So you've got to win the state to get their votes to possibly win the election. So you really have two elections going on. Yes, we have the presidential election, but 50 little presidential elections. All right? Now, third parties. They're not Republican, they're not Democrat. There's something in between. Those third parties can influence an election, and it happens in 2000. Actually, we'll jump back. 1992. George H.W. Bush is finishing his first term. He's got this little-known contender, Bill Clinton, came out of no place. And we have a third-party candidate by the name of H. Ross Perot. And he was a Republican. He was a businessman. He was a Texas. He kind of sounded like this. Had a high-pitched voice, talking a little fast. He was a short little guy. And he came on the scene, and he pulled enough votes away from George Bush to allow Bill Clinton to win. Now, there were some other things there, but really, had Ross Perot not been in the race, most of those votes would have went to George Bush, and he would have won a second term. Bill Clinton would have been elected. Fast forward 2000. George W. Bush, his son, same thing, except this time it's on the Democratic side. Ralph Nader, far left-wing kind of guy. He's running as a third-party candidate. He pulls enough votes from Al Gore, Bill Clinton's vice president, pulls enough votes away from Al Gore that allows W. Bush to win. Okay? So a third-party candidate can really influence. And then one last little thing here. Even though we've got this Electoral College, and you would think if you get the majority of votes, you're going to win the Electoral College. In the famous words of Lee Corso on College Game Day, not so fast, my friends. It is possible to lose the popular vote, or win the popular vote, and lose the elections. Happened in 2000 with George W. Bush and Al Gore. Al Gore won the popular vote, lost the electoral vote. And in 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, lost the electoral vote to now President Donald Trump. Because of this, there sometimes have been calls to eliminate the electoral college. There's arguments for the electoral college, helps protect those smaller states like Wyoming, uh, the Dakotas, Alaska. On the other hand, there's the argument to be made, it's not fair, that this person has won the popular vote, the total number of votes, and they lose the election. All right. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. You got your presidency. Watch this a couple of times. Review the note sheet that I posted, and then you've got your worksheet that you got to do. All right. I know it's not the ideal thing, but times are tough. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Look to see you again. Hopefully, this school year. See you on the other side.